Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 18 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And on the front page, the headline reads, "The Party Rolls On. Ghana, Panama fans bring passion for the games." And there's a picture of the fans celebrating and cheering on their teams. And it says Ghana fans in the top picture and Panama supporters made their voices heard Wednesday as their teams met in a World Cup match at Toronto Stadium. Ghana won 1-0 on a late goal. And the headline, the article is continued inside the paper, and the headline inside the paper reads, "Passionate fans unfazed by wet weather. Drumming and dancing keep party going as Ghana tops Panama in dramatic fashion." And this is by Ben Spur. Toronto's second match of the 2026 World Cup played out under steady rain on Wednesday evening in front of thousands of soggy but spirited fans who watched two of the tournament underdogs fight to a dramatic finish. At the end of a mostly scrappy game, Ghana beat Panama 1-0 with a 95th minute goal from midfielder Caleb Yerenki that set off deafening celebrations from the traveling Black Stars fans. "Scoring in the last minute like that feels like we won the World Cup," said Ghana supporter Sefo Kwaku, who took in the match from the Fan Festival watch party. Through more than an hour and a half of scoreless soccer, the wet and cooler weather did little to extinguish enthusiasm among the spectators. A section of gold-clad Ghana fans in the upper tier of the North Stand scarcely stopped drumming and dancing, while a Panamanian contingent in the South Stand, dressed in red, did their best to drown them out. As the match began, there were visibly more empty seats inside Toronto Stadium. The temporarily expanded and renamed BMO Field than there were for Canada's opening 1-1 tie against Bosnia-Herzegovina last Friday. However, the official attendance was announced as 42,942, just shy of the 43,036 capacity. With Panama scheduled to play in 2 of the 6 matches being staged in Toronto, an estimated 25,000 people from the country have made the trip to Canada for the tournament. Many of them congregated at Trinity Bellwoods Park on Wednesday for more than 4 hours before the 7 p.m. kickoff. Along their 2-kilometer march to the stadium, they were met with smiles and waves from locals. Some joined in on chants of "Ole, ole, ole, Panama, Panama" from their balconies. Construction workers took a break from their duties to whistle at the crowd. 2 blocks southeast of Trinity Bellwoods, Ghana fans took over Stanley Park, drumming and blowing trumpets and singing gospel songs. Among the crowd was Prince Fialo, who traveled from Toulon, France for the match. He was undaunted by the impending wet weather and said he would watch his team rain or shine. "I'm going to stand in the rain," he said. "I'm going to support my team until the end." Outside the stadium before the game, Nelson Marquez, who came in from Panama City, also said the prospect of getting drenched wouldn't deter him from showing up for his team playing in their only second World Cup. "We are ready," Nelson said with a grin. "We have a lot of rain in Panama." Ahead of Wednesday's game, Mayor Olivia Chow declared that with the eyes of the world on Toronto, local government had so far, quote, "delivered," unquote. She cited hundreds of thousands of people moved by the TTC, well-maintained public spaces, and first responders ensuring tournament safety. The next article is also from the front page under the byline of Parliament Hill. Ottawa urged not to expand MAID, or perhaps they call it MAID. It's all in capitals. Government should indefinitely exclude eligibility based on mental illness. And that's from the panel. And this is by Raisa Patel. Ottawa. A parliamentary committee has recommended that the federal government shelve indefinitely its expansion of medical assistance of dying for people whose only underlying condition is mental illness, a conclusion some members sharply criticized in a dissenting opinion. A 17-member special committee made up of MPs and senators released a report Wednesday that contained a singular recommendation about the expansion, which was set to come into effect on March 17, 2027. The majority of the committee officially advised Ottawa to amend the criminal code to indefinitely exclude persons whose sole underlying medical condition is a mental illness from eligibility for medical assistance in dying. It now falls to Prime Minister Mark Carney's Liberals to decide whether to accept the committee's verdict and how to act if they do. We're going to take the time to digest the report, Justice Minister Sean Fraser told reporters before the report was released. At minimum, over the next few weeks, it'll largely be understanding the recommendations that the committee made and the reasons that they landed on those recommendations. From there, we'll have to determine, as a government, the right path forward, Fraser said. Sources have signaled to the Star, on the condition they not be named, that the Carney government will likely abide by Wednesday's recommendation. But 3 senators involved in the study, Rosemary Moody, Pamela Wallin, and Christopher Wells, objected to the report's conclusion and instead asked the federal government to make a direct reference to the Supreme Court of Canada to clarify the law regarding the expansion of the practice. This dissenting opinion results from the highly irregular and flawed process by which the committee conducted its business and on the poor quality of empirical, medical, scientific, and research data that was presented at the committee, the senators wrote. Wells told the Star the committee's work became too political. This is exactly why we're calling for a reference to the Supreme Court. Let's solve and get a ruling on these constitutional issues once and for all, Wells said. The divide comes as the committee faces accusations that its study is biased in favor of amplifying those who oppose the practice. Its study comes after a 2021 Trudeau-era law, spurred by a Quebec Supreme Court ruling, expanded access to MAID, or MAID, to those whose deaths were not reasonably foreseeable. That law included a clause that temporarily barred access for those suffering solely from a mental disorder. Those who oppose the expansion assert that opening up MAID to those with mental illnesses alone would lead to preventable deaths, undermine recovery efforts, and encourage those with poor access to health, housing, and social supports to seek death. Wednesday's report highlighted that there is still a lack of consensus around eligibility criteria and clinical readiness concerning MAID for mental illness, including whether the underlying condition is truly irremediable. Some witnesses also cast doubt on how prepared Canada's mental health system would be to onboard such a major change. I would say in the Thunder Bay emergency room on any given day, you might see 5 to 20 people who either attempted suicide or have considered or are considering attempting suicide. said committee co-chair and Liberal MP Marcus Pawlowski, a physician who has previously opposed the expansion of the practice. I have to say that for the vast majority of people, it is unsuccessful, and they go on at some point later on to find happiness. The number of people who do not get better is very small, he said, but those in favor of MAID for mental illness argue that the practice would only apply to those experiencing chronic and intolerable suffering. The report noted that some witnesses believe it is a violation of charter rights to treat mental illnesses separately from physical illnesses, and that there is now better guidance to assess irremediability. Claire Elise Brosseau, whose experience suffering from mental health conditions for decades was referenced in Wednesday's report, questioned whether the committee was well balanced. I'd like to ask the committee members if they think they've left people like me better off. Consider what it does to people when society repeatedly tells us we aren't qualified to speak about our own suffering. We are people who already struggle with worthlessness, hopelessness, stigma, shame, and self-doubt, her statement read. Brosseau, who suffers from severe bipolar and post-traumatic stress disorders, applied in May to the Ontario Superior Court of Justice to receive medically assisted death for mental illness as a sole underlying condition. She is also part of a charter challenge alongside advocacy group Dying with Dignity. That group said Wednesday it was disappointed by the committee's recommendation, while the final report was welcomed by other groups like Inclusion Canada, which opposes the expansion. In a supplementary opinion, the Conservatives said they supported the committee's ultimate recommendation, while the Bloc Québécois issued a dissenting opinion arguing against the indefinite suspension of the expansion. The next article is under the byline of immigration. Family challenges Canada's refugee policy. Hondurans denied entry at border, deported by U.S. And this is by Nicholas Keong. They arrived at a port of entry to Canada a year ago and pleaded with a border officer to let them in for asylum because they said they would face detention and deportation if returned to the United States. Coming to Canada, according to the family from Honduras, was the only option after their refugee claim in the U.S. was abruptly canceled by the new Trump administration in 2025, and they would face removal to a country where they claimed they had been attacked and threatened by gang members. When their request to access protection in Canada was denied, the couple and their 6-year-old son returned to the U.S. and were immediately detained. They were later transferred to the notorious Dilley Immigration Processing Center in Texas, and after 2 weeks, sent back to Honduras, where they are now in hiding. Now, the family, identified in federal court documents as PR, RS, and TU for their safety, has launched a constitutional challenge against the Canadian government. They accuse Ottawa of violating their rights by handing them over to the U.S., despite what they claim is mounting evidence of rights abuses linked to the Trump administration's agenda of mass detention and deportation. By sending at-risk refugees back to danger in the U.S., the litigation alleges that Canada has failed to honor the terms of the bilateral asylum pact and ensure that returnees to the U.S. would not face rights violations. Those alleged violations include unfair detention or the risk of being deported to another country where their rights or lives would be in danger. The claim by the family has not been tested in court. A hearing date has not been scheduled, and the federal government has yet to file a response. Under the Safe Third Country Agreement, in force since 2004, Canada and the U.S. each recognize the other country as a safe place to seek protection. It allows Canada to turn back potential refugees who arrive at its shared border on the basis they should pursue their claims in the States, the country where they first arrived. Those with close family members in the country are exempted from the ban. I just need to pause right here for one moment to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And now I'm going back to the article about the Honduran refugees. The agreement has been the subject of several major constitutional challenges. Although the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in 2023 that the Asylum Pact did not violate the Charter, it said Ottawa must ensure that safety valves are made available to returnees to the U.S. to safeguard their rights. Safety valves include protections against rights violations and access to judicial reviews. Every day, people fleeing danger present themselves at the Canadian border, expressing grave fears about what will happen to them if they are returned to the U.S., said Asma Faizi, president of the Canadian Council for Refugees, in a press release on Wednesday. The Refugee Council and Amnesty International are part of the legal action. While their fears are very real, the safety valves supposedly offered by the Canadian government do not, in practice, exist, and refugees' pleas for protection are ignored. The lawsuit said there have been significant changes in law, policy, and practice for refugees and refugee claimants in the U.S. since January 2025, when Trump returned to the White House. Not only has the detention regime been expanded, some classes of detainees don't have access to release or to meaningful review of their circumstances. Claimants are routinely detained, face significant obstacles in contacting and retaining counsel, are repeatedly transferred between facilities, and are given very little advance notice of their interview and cannot provide documentation during the interview, the lawsuit alleged. There has been an increased reliance on removals to third countries where due process is not guaranteed and the risk of sending them back to face harm in their home countries is real, it added. Refugees are being turned away at our borders and handed over to the U.S. system of cruelty and chaos. Keti Nivyambandi, Secretary of the Amnesty International Canada's English-speaking section, said in a statement. Instead of protecting people fleeing prosecution, Canada is violating their rights and exposing them to harm. Canada must put an end to this unconscionable practice without delay. The applicants asked the federal court to order Ottawa to take all steps necessary to facilitate the Honduran families' return to Canada and reassess their eligibility for asylum. They also request that any enforcement of removal of individuals connected to those ineligibility determinations must be fair, transparent, and charter compliant. Neither the Immigration Department nor the Canada Border Services Agency provided a response to an inquiry about the litigation by the Star's deadline. Okay, the next article is under Star Investigation. Watchdog asked to probe ex-Ford staffer. Province mining firm say job change didn't break rules. And this is by Emma McIntosh. Ontario's Integrity Commissioner is being asked to investigate a former Ford government staffer's move to a mining company whose project he helped advance while working for the province in 2024. The Ontario NDP and government accountability group Democracy Watch filed complaints this week requesting investigations into the circumstances surrounding Kevin Rombout's departure. The requests come in the wake of a Star investigation that raised questions about whether Rombout may have broken ethics rules when he went to work as an in-house lobbyist for Kinross Gold. This kind of shady backroom deal is exactly why the premier is losing the people's trust, NDP leader Marit Stiles said in a statement. The provincial government and Kinross both said they followed the rules governing Rombout's job change. While working for the government, Rombout briefed staff in Premier Doug Ford's office, exchanged emails with publicly traded company, and directed bureaucrats at multiple ministries on how to advance the project. In late 2024, Rombout left to work for Kinross, which is seeking to build a gold mine in northwestern Ontario, upstream from Grassy Narrows First Nation. There is a reasonable likelihood that Mr. Rombout is working for Kinross Gold alongside colleagues who lobbied him personally within the last 12 months on behalf of the same clients, and who now have the unfair advantage of Mr. Rombout's knowledge of confidential government matters that could benefit the private interests of Kinross Gold. Stiles wrote Tuesday in a complaint to the Integrity Commissioner, which was provided to the Star. Hannah Jensen, a spokesperson for Premier Doug Ford, did not comment on the letters to the Integrity Commissioner, but said the provincial government has had no engagement with Mr. Rombout on any mining projects related to Kinross. More than 4,000 pages of internal government correspondence obtained by the Star via Freedom of Information legislation showed that while Kinross has enjoyed close and constant access to the Ford government, Grassy Narrows has been sidelined, even as research shows wastewater from the proposed mine site could exacerbate the effects of industrial mercury already polluting the river that feeds the community. Kinross has said it adheres to the highest environmental standards and that the project can be operated responsibly. The First Nations leaders have said they are concerned about how the senior public servant was allowed to so quickly take his insider knowledge to Bay Street. Ontario's ethics rules mandate ex-government staff wait a year before accepting a job with an entity that had substantial dealings with as a public servant, if they had access to confidential information that could give that entity an unfair advantage. The law also bars former staff from changing sides on a negotiation between the government and an outside entity. Kinross and the Ontario government have said Rombout cleared the job change with the province's previous integrity commissioner. Kinross said the commissioner found Rombout did not appear to know confidential information that would give the mining company an edge. Neither provided a full copy of that clearance, and the Integrity Commissioner's office said it could not confirm whether it gave advice. In a letter sent Monday to current Ontario Integrity Commissioner Catherine Motherwell, Democracy Watch co-founder Duff Conacher said that explanation doesn't make sense and an investigation and public ruling by you is clearly needed. Kinross spokesperson Samantha Sheffield did not answer questions about the complaints to the Integrity Commissioner. The Star's reporting demonstrates a clear lack of objectivity and mischaracterizes The facts related to both our project and Mr. Rombout's role in government, his engagement with the Integrity Commissioner, and his activities since joining Kinross, Sheffield said. The Integrity Commissioner's office said the letters from the Ontario NDP and Democracy Watch are under review. And this is under the byline of Star Exclusive. Ontario needs grads in STEM, health, report says. More than 1 million needed by 2035 to meet labor market needs. And this is by Kristen Rashowi. Ontario will need 60,000 more university graduates over the next decade in the key areas of science, technology, healthcare, and business, says a new report to be released Thursday. Overall, Ontario needs more than 1 million university grads to meet labor market needs by 2035, meaning the current 85,000 a year will need to hit an annual average of 100,500, says the analysis from Stokes Economics that was commissioned by the Council of Ontario Universities. The biggest need is in STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, followed by doctors, nurses, and other health professionals, as well as business and finance. The province also requires additional graduates in education, law, and social community services, management occupations, and arts/culture and recreation. We're now needing 1 million graduates by 2035, so we need to find out where the acute shortages are, said Steve Orsini, President and CEO of the Universities Council, which will officially release the report on Thursday and track progress in the coming years. It's material in a world where we need top talent to run innovation and change to adopt the latest technology, he added. Those shortfalls undermined our economic growth and prosperity. The council says the demand reflects job openings in occupations where a university education is typically required or preferred, and underscores the growing need for highly skilled talent across the province's economy. And the forecast accounted not just for workforce growth, but also retirements, as well as impact of technology and artificial intelligence. The report comes as the Ford government has added 70,000 additional spaces to colleges and universities. Some of those are accounted for in the analysis. Schools are currently working with local businesses to pitch proposals for the remaining 40,000 that will be created over the next 4 years, some as early as this fall. We are expanding the programs students want to build the workforce Ontario needs. Colleges and Universities Minister Nolan Quinn said last month in announcing the new spots that will focus on STEM, healthcare, teaching, and the trades. It's all part of a $6.4 billion boost for the post-secondary sector over the next 4 years, announced in February before the province's spring budget. The Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations has been urging the Ford government to provide funding for a wider variety of programs, and the new report notes that arts, culture, recreation, and sport, along with other jobs, are also going to need university-trained employees. All university degree programs are designed to benefit communities and the economy, President Rob Christopherson has said. And I need to pause once more here to remind you that you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is titled, Lawyer Penalized $31K for Filing AI-Generated Gibberish to Panel. Artificial intelligence can't think like a lawyer, Law Society notes. And it says we are tracking this phenomenon to warn Canadians about the dangers of using generative AI for legal research. and this is by Betsy Powell. A suspended Toronto lawyer who filed documents filled with false and misleading information generated by artificial intelligence has been ordered to pay $31,150 to the Law Society in what appears to be the largest AI-related cost award by a Canadian court or tribunal. Ontario's Law Society Tribunal ordered the payment to emphasize the harm done by irresponsible use of artificial intelligence, which, in this case, cost the legal governing body time, cost, and effort. Sharyar Mazahari's documents contain numerous references to cases that do not exist, or, in cases that did exist, misrepresented what they actually said. The result was gibberish and incoherent, the panel wrote in its decision. Artificial intelligence can't think like a lawyer, the decision reads. Mazahari had his license suspended on a provisional basis in November 2024 after being linked to a large-scale mortgage fraud that was cited as a motive behind a deadly triple shooting. Almost a year later, Mazahari asked the Law Society to either cancel or vary the suspension. During the subsequent process, he submitted materials produced with the assistance of generative artificial intelligence, according to the decision released last week. Mazahari alleged the Law Society was biased against him and asked the tribunal members to recuse themselves. However, not a single proposition of law in any of Mazahari's materials was supported by a reliable authority, the panel found. The tribunal ultimately rejected his bid to be reinstated and ordered that he pay the full costs of $31,150 immediately. His irresponsible use of artificial intelligence not only wasted time, cost, and effort, it was profoundly improper, and he should bear the full cost of his actions. Mazahari admitted that he used AI and apologized, saying he did not intend to mislead the tribunal. I believed in good faith that the AI tools would produce accurate citations and reasoning. I now see that I failed to verify the output with sufficient care, and I sincerely apologize. I'm sorry, and I sincerely apologize, and it's in parentheses, it says SIC, so it's probably how he wrote it, to the panel for the resulting inaccuracies. The Star could not reach Mazahari for comment. It appears this is the first time a party has submitted written arguments with hallucinated material to the Law Society Tribunal, the decision says. However, it is by no means a first in Canadian law, it adds. According to CanLII, a free online database providing access to case law, a Canadian court or tribunal has identified 132 instances since 2024 where a party has submitted a fictitious or hallucinated citation. Those include 24 involving Law Society licensees, which raises significant issues, the panel wrote. The majority of the AI cases are linked to self-represented individuals. It may be the largest cost award issued by a Canadian court or tribunal to date in response to filing AI hallucinated cases as part of legal submissions, according to Toronto-based lawyer and researcher Tom McIntosh Zhang, co-founder of CourtReady.ca, a publicly accessible database tracking AI hallucinating case law in Canadian courts. We are tracking this phenomenon to warn Canadians about the dangers of using generative AI for legal research. The vast majority turn to these tools in good faith, often because they cannot afford a lawyer. with no way of knowing, the tools can invent cases or laws that do not exist, McIntosh Zhang wrote in an email to the Star. The tribunal emphasized that the cost award is by no means a determination on whether Mazahari engaged in professional misconduct as alleged. Another panel will make that determination. The next article, Trump would cancel CUSMA immediately. President says U.S. would be better off without trade deal. This is by Tonda McCharles. U.S. President Donald Trump said Wednesday that he would prefer if the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement on trade expired immediately, although he left open the possibility that he could sign a new deal, but would still rather leave it unsigned. I'd rather have it terminated, Trump told reporters on the tarmac at Paris-Orly Airport, where he arrived after leaving the G7 summit before a dinner hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron. Trump's comments came after he and Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke several times over the past 2 days at the leaders' meeting in Evian, and after their top trade negotiators met in person to further hash out points of trade friction between the two countries. The Star reported Wednesday on the list of contentious trade irritants that are at the heart of U.S. concerns as the July 1 deadline looms for Canada, the U.S., and Mexico to declare their intentions about renewing the continental trade deal known as CUSMA or CUSMA in Canada and USMCA in the United States. If the three signatories don't declare an intention to renew the deal for another 16 years, a period of annual reviews would kick in, during which the pact would remain in force for another decade, unless any party gives the required 6 months' notice to withdraw. Trump said that's clearly his preferred option at this time. To me, I think it's better without it, he said. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of it. Asked about a hot mic moment in which Carney told Trump about Canada's limits on Chinese electric vehicle imports and assured the president that it is a hard cap, Trump said he did not convey approval of Canada's approach. I don't know that I said I like it, but I could understand that, Trump said. Would I rather see a cap than no cap? I would. On Canada. That's a contradiction of how Carney framed their conversation. Earlier in the day, he told Canadian reporters that he spoke to the president, about the limits on Chinese EVs to brief him. I'm not surprised that the President of the United States doesn't follow every detail of every agreement that Canada has, and he likes the structure, Carney said. Actually, we had a follow-up conversation about it as well. Trump's latest comments on the prospects of signing a new trade agreement go beyond his remarks last week when he said he was not looking to renew the continental trade deal. On Wednesday, he also disputed the notion that the deal would nonetheless remain in force for another decade, saying, I view it as possibly expiring immediately. His dismissal of the deal came after U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer met on the sidelines of the G7 summit with Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc in an attempt to advance bilateral trade talks. On the Canadian side, LeBlanc told reporters that we took stock of the progress over the last 2 weeks in their Tuesday meeting. We talked about a number of other issues that the United States raises with us, but also talked about issues that are important to Canadian workers and the Canadian economy. So it's by no means a one-way conversation, he said. LeBlanc also said he is still convinced the agreement benefits the economies of all three countries. Trump is unconvinced. Asked by reporters to clarify what he meant by terminating the agreement and if he meant allowing it to roll over into an annual process, Trump said, "I would rather not have the agreement, but I may sign it. But we do better as a country if we don't have an agreement. Yeah, I'm thinking about maybe we won't be able to make a deal. I would rather not have the USMCA." In his first term as president, Trump negotiated the current trade deal, which replaced the North American Free Trade Agreement. He said Wednesday that the primary reason I wanted it was because the new agreement provided a review and a termination clause. "I would prefer not having an agreement, but I'm open to doing it," he said. "We'll see what happens." Former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney shrugged off the comments, saying in an interview that Canadians know how not to get too agitated by Trump's improvised comments to reporters. The next article is titled "Man Gets Life Sentence in Mother's Murder." Judge previously rejected claim he was not criminally responsible due to a mental disorder. And this is by Betsy Powell. Supreme Court Justice Sean Neketsuru told Colin Hatcher Wednesday that fatally stabbing his artist's mother in an Etobicoke Park was extremely aggravating, with profound consequences for the people who loved the exceptional, kind, generous, and creative soul. On February 21, 2021, just before 11 a.m., Hatcher repeatedly slashed Catherine Boyle Hatcher, 69, with a sharp instrument in a wooded area of the Kings Mill Park near Old Mill TTC station. Lying in a pool of blood, she called 911 for help, but succumbed to her injuries before help arrived. "She was a woman who gave birth to you, nursed you, cared for you when you were a child, encouraged and supported you even during the rough patches of your teens, took pride and joy in your accomplishments, and never turned her back on you when you became ill and a danger to her and the family," the judge said, glancing at the 43-year-old man sitting in the prisoner's box. Yet Nakatsuru said he also found that Hatcher's culpability is diminished by his long history of severe mental illness, which is why he decided to impose a mandatory life sentence with parole ineligibility period of 11 years, considered on the lower end of the scale. "Clearly, the most important mitigating factor is the fact you were suffering from schizophrenia. Although you did not meet the test for not criminally responsible due to mental disorder, as I have found, your serious mental illness played a very big role in this crime." At the judge-alone trial this year, Nakatsuru rejected the defense of not criminally responsible, writing in his decision that even though I can readily conclude that Mr. Hatcher was mentally ill and unstable at the time of the homicide, I do not find it more likely than not that Mr. Hatcher was incapable of knowing that his actions were morally wrong. Under the criminal code, a person found guilty of second-degree murder receives an automatic life sentence. However, a judge has discretion to impose a parole ineligibility period anywhere from 10 to 25 years. The Crown was seeking a parole ineligibility period of 15 years or more. The defense suggested 10 years. The judge noted Hatcher had no prior criminal record and that he still has family support, including from his father and uncle. He also said they were encouraging signs that Hatcher, who has a long history of entrenched delusions and lack of insight into the need for medication and treatment, told the court at his sentencing hearing that he has new insight into his condition and is taking treatment. However, caution must be exercised, Nakatsuru said. In his written decision, Nakatsuru cited an insightful observation made by one of Catherine Boyle's recent friends who said, Justice is not about sentencing and blaming a victim, who, after all, is a mother's beloved son. It is about recognizing what went wrong in our systems of caring and treatment and protection. And until those systems are well in place, this tragedy could be repeated, Bridget Lynch told court. Addressing Hatcher directly, she said he has a chance at redemption, although it will take work every day over many months, indeed, over long years. And I need to pause one last time to remind you, you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is also a Star exclusive. Grits to tone down police powers bill. Liberals aim to push legislation through Parliament, but critics say changes don't go far enough. And this is by Mark Ramsey. The Carney government is set to tweak some parts of its controversial reforms to police search powers as it tries to push the bill through Parliament in the face of widespread opposition. The Star has learned the Liberals are preparing to have the time electronic service providers would have to retain Canadians' metadata from 1 year to 6 months, according to two sources with knowledge of the changes who requested an anonymity to speak freely. A 2-year expiry to potential ministerial orders requiring a company to upgrade their systems to make it easier for police to intercept private communications will also be added to the legislation, according to the sources. The Carney government is also expected to add protections for encrypted communications, as Public Safety Minister Gary Anandazangare promised this week, after critics warned that wording in the legislation which gives providers the option to refuse compliance if it would introduce a systemic vulnerability was too vague. It's not yet clear what exactly that will look like. Those concessions and other proposals from opposition parties are expected to be presented at a committee meeting Thursday, a final marathon hearing in the House of Commons after the Liberals moved to shut down debate and accelerate the legislation while accusing the Conservatives of obstructing Parliament. Bill C-22, the lawful access legislation long sought by Canadian police and spy agencies who say it's a necessary modernization, still has to pass through the Senate before becoming law. To Tamir Israel, the Director of Privacy, Surveillance, and Technology at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the proposed changes amount to helpful harm reduction, but are not enough to address major issues in the contentious legislation. There's a way to do this that's reasonable, but these little fixes aren't really getting at the core problem with the law, Israel told the Star. There are still some gaps there. He said that having expiry dates for ministerial orders and a shorter maximum time period for retaining data like IP addresses and timestamps of online conversations does not change how intrusive these proposals are or how vulnerable providers' systems would be to malicious hackers. And required approval from the Federal Intelligence Commissioner for the ministerial orders is not enough, Israel said, because it operates more secretively and makes it harder for public scrutiny. We have problems with using this intelligence commissioner as the source of external control for secret ministerial orders in particular, but in general, we think it needs to go to the courts, he told the Star. Anandasangari's office would not comment on proposed changes to the bill. Proposed measures to force select Canadian electronic service providers, including telecommunications companies to upgrade their systems so they have the ability to hand over private communications to police when served with warrant, while also storing customers' metadata for up to a year, have faced intense blowback. Telecom companies have also warned about potential costs, and much of the legislation leaves specifics to future regulations, leading to further criticism. Secure messaging platform Signal has said it would rather leave Canada than comply with the changes if it's included in the bill. Apple has accused Ottawa of potentially making it create, quote, backdoors, unquote, in their system. The Carney government has tried to assuage concerns while slamming tech giants as the real threat on privacy and accusing them of being hypocritical for operating in other G7 countries with similar regimes. Lawful access policies have also been controversial in countries like the UK. Anandasangari challenged other parties this week, arguing victims cannot wait any longer. Police need these tools, and concessions are being made. We've heard the voices of those who raised concerns, and I've spoken with several of them today, and I continue to speak to them throughout this process. I told them directly that we will amend this bill to address their concerns, Anandasangari told reporters. That means clear protections for encrypted communications. That means a clear definition of systemic vulnerability in the bill. That means metadata stored for a shorter period of time. That means ensuring industry is at the table advising us during the development of regulations. Opposition parties, meanwhile, have slammed the Liberals in Parliament this week for their move to shut down debate, saying it would not give them enough time to consider changes before being forced to vote. When you ram legislation through over objections or over considerations from law professors and civil liberties groups, you have a problem, Conservative MP Frank Caputo said. So far, what I'm witnessing from the government is an unwillingness to be open for amendments that stakeholder groups have brought up, said New Democrat MP Jenny Kwan. The next article is titled, Whitby Mayor Calls Out Hateful Remarks. Photo with Muslim volunteers draws racist comments. This is by Jason Miller. Whitby's mayor is calling out what she says were racist, anti-Muslim, and threatening remarks made about a picture posted online with her and a group of volunteers from a Muslim community organization. Mayor Elizabeth Roy said a photo she shared on social media of her standing with a group of women from the Islamic Circle of North America, that's ICNA, Sisters Whitby, during a gathering over the weekend to mark Eid al-Adha, attracted hateful comments that the mayor found deeply alarming. The mayor said the majority of the remarks posted online were racist, anti-Muslim, demeaning, and threatening. Some targeted the Muslim women in the photo because of how they were dressed or questioned whether they belong in Canada, Roy told the Star. This is awful. Some of the comments attached to a Facebook post reviewed by the Star saw some individuals mocking the women's faith, culture, and traditional attire. Roy said some of the hateful comments have since been deleted by Facebook. Roy said the incident targeting volunteers is unfortunately not an anomaly. Over the past 2 years, Whitby has experienced several disturbing incidents of hate, including anti-Muslim graffiti, repeated acts of anti-Semitic vandalism, and hateful online rhetoric directed at Muslim welfare home in recent weeks. This is not something that we support within our community, Roy said. This is not who we are. The mayor reinforced that everyone should feel safe and welcome in the community where they live, and this form of discrimination is not acceptable. She credits ICNA for its contributions to the community, such as park cleanups, parenting programs, and mental health workshops. Ariba Ahmed, an outreach manager with ICNA Whitby, said the racist, Islamophobic, and hateful comments directed at her community are deeply distressing and disappointing. What should have been a celebration of volunteerism, service, and civic engagement instead became an opportunity for some individuals to spread prejudice, intimidation, and division, said Ahmed, who is pictured in the photo with the mayor. Ahmed said the volunteer-led group will continue to contribute to meaningful community initiatives such as supporting seniors in local care facilities. She said the mayor publicly condemning the hateful comments reaffirms that Muslims are a valued and integral part of Whitby, and sends an important message that hatred and discrimination have no place in our Canada. At the same time, Ahmed said these incidents highlight a troubling reality about the frequency of Islamophobia and racism, both online and offline. She said Muslim women should not be targeted for wearing a hijab, or traditional Islamic clothing. Their choice to practice their faith openly should never make them the subject of ridicule or abuse, Ahmed said. I can fit in one more quick article, and this is under Canada Briefs. Alberta, Smiths fires back at First Nations chiefs' claims. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said Wednesday that a group of Indigenous chiefs need to check themselves after they accused her of potential treasonous activity for calling a separation vote. The Assembly of Treaty Chiefs, representing First Nations across Alberta, organizing the vote is an intentional treaty violation that Smith's government is ignoring risks to Canada's sovereignty. Smith dismissed the chief's statement, "I've had my differences with the federal government, but I've never used language like that. I would ask the treaty chiefs to check themselves because we have a very collaborative relationship between our government and our ministers." And now I will end with you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 18 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.